Now for the news in detail. The worldwide number of deaths from the new coronavirus has exceeded 250,000, with over 3.5 million people infected. This comes as the U.S. recorded its lowest daily death count in a month, with 938 fatalities. More on that now in this report.
A number of countries have witnessed a decline in the new cases and deaths from COVID-19 over the past few days, reviving hope in dismal times. But a newly revised mortality model predicts nearly 135,000 Americans will die from COVID-19 by early August. These numbers have been doubled from previous projections as social distancing measures in the country are being relaxed. The global health body has urged the world leaders to unite and help less developed countries defeat the pandemic.
We're in this together, and together we will prevail. We will prevail through national unity and global solidarity. The antidotes to this virus are national unity and global solidarity. The antidote to this virus is the human spirit.
In Nigeria, some businesses have reopened after the government eased the lockdown in key urban areas to restart Africa's largest economy. Over in New Zealand, authorities say there have been no new cases or deaths from the disease for second day in a row. As the region returns to normalcy, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she has discussed to form a travel bubble with Australia.
I'm very keen, of course, as I've always said, that the advantage we have of getting back control of the virus has been to try and get back to some form of normality. International travel won't feel like that for some time, but if we can find a way to make it work with Australia, then that would give that sense of normality, if we can make it work.
There have been no new deaths from COVID-19 in China, while the National Health Commission reported one imported case in 24 hours.
Well, here in Pakistan, the death toll from COVID-19 has risen by 24 to 486. The Health Ministry reported 1,315 infection cases in the last 24 hours, bringing the total to 21,501. It said over 5,700 patients have recovered so far, while 186 remain critical. The ministry said that more than 222,000 tests have been conducted countrywide, with nearly 10,000 since yesterday. Meanwhile, 193 Pakistani citizens, including women and children, have been repatriated from India via the Wagah border crossing. Authorities in Lahore have screened and transferred them to quarantine centers. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to protest the continued aggression and ceasefire violations by India along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said 6 civilians were wounded in Indian forces firing in Buxar sector yesterday. The Foreign Office said 3 women and 1 child were among the wounded in Azad Kashmir. It said the senseless actions by Indian forces violate the 2003 ceasefire deal and international humanitarian law. It said Indian forces along the LOC and the working boundary have been targeting civilian areas. The office said India is trying to divert the world's attention from its ongoing atrocities in occupied Kashmir. The office said India has so far committed 957 ceasefire violations in the current year. The Indian government has declared the whole valley of occupied Kashmir as a hotspot of deadly COVID-19. This comes days after Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan warned New Delhi is intentionally using the virus as a tool for ethnic cleansing of Kashmiris. Speaking to media, local officials say the step is being taken after a spike in cases, with no signs of slowing down. Earlier, only 4 districts, Srinagar, Bandipora, Anantnag and Shopian, were classified as red zones. Last month, New Delhi diverted Kashmir-designated coronavirus testing kits, medication and protective gear to other parts of India. Meanwhile, doctors say the internet ban in the valley is the biggest hurdle in their fight against the virus. Earlier, Pakistan had asked India to lift the curfew from the valley to ensure supplies of essentials to tackle the pandemic. In a statement, Islamabad said New Delhi must mitigate the suffering of Kashmiris during this global crisis. During a hearing in the Supreme Court, the Indian government has opposed the restoration of high-speed internet in occupied Kashmir. The top court is hearing petitions challenging the communications blockout to tackle COVID-19 pandemic in the valley. In its reply, New Delhi claimed high-speed internet can be used for sharing information about its forces in the valley. The government also claimed the internet would be used to spread militancy and propaganda. It said matters of state policy should not be interfered with and must be left up to the government. Petitioners argued that doctors and hospitals need online communication to fight the deadly virus. The occupied valley has been reeling under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 274 days. Afghan National Security Council spokesperson Javed Faisal says the government has released 102 more Taliban prisoners. The spokesperson said a total of over 850 inmates have been freed by Kabul so far. In a statement, Faisal said more prisoners can be released by the Kabul administration upon the start of talks. He said the Taliban should also resume the release of Afghan forces personnel from the list the government has shared. Earlier, the Taliban released 100 security personnel and officials of the Afghan military. The group said it wants the prisoner release under the Doha deal to be expedited to save them from COVID-19. The presidential palace of Afghanistan has reported progress in talks to end the political turmoil in the country. The conflict between President Ashraf Ghani and rival Abdullah has pushed Afghanistan into uncertainty since earlier this year. In a statement, the presidential palace spokesperson said the talks were underway between the two sides. The spokesperson did not provide any further details. Earlier this week, Abdullah said efforts by national personalities to resolve the political crisis have borne fruit. The former chief executive said agreements in principle have been reached. He also said work is underway on details to finalize the agreement. Syria says it has thwarted an Israeli missile attack on a research center and a military base in the northern province of Aleppo. In a statement, the army said it is assessing the damage caused by the strikes on military barracks in Al-Safira. This was Israel's fifth attack on Syrian territory in 2 weeks. Last Thursday, Israeli helicopters fired several missiles from the occupied Golan Heights on targets in southern Syria. Last month, the Israeli Defense Minister Naftali Bennett said Tel Aviv would step up its campaign against Iran in Syria. Turkey says it will no longer tolerate terrorist harassment in Syria's Idlib safe zone or ramped-up attacks which flout agreements. In a televised address, President Tayyip Erdogan said terrorist groups are trying to exploit Turkey's preoccupation with the coronavirus pandemic. Erdogan said terrorist elements have stepped up attacks both within Turkey's borders and beyond. He said the Turkish armed forces are pursuing and neutralizing terrorists without delay in operations. Erdogan said Ankara's operations across the border will also continue without interruption. The Turkish president said Ankara is monitoring every step of the terrorist group operating in northern Iraq and Syria. Erdogan also said Turkey would continue supporting Libya's legitimate government to transform the area into a region of peace. Human Rights Watch says ISIS used the Al-Hota Gorge in northwest Syria as a mass grave for people the group abducted and executed. In a statement, the rights body has urged authorities to preserve evidence from the site needed to prosecute the terrorist outfit. ISIS controlled the area around the Al-Hota Gorge from 2013 to 2015. Human Rights Watch found evidence of the terrorist group's crimes by flying a drone into the 50-meter deep ravine. It says the bodies of at least 6 victims are present at the site. The group adds, based on the state of decomposition, the cadavers were dumped there long before the group had left the area. Iraq's parliament will cast their ballots in a confidence vote for the cabinet and premiership of Prime Minister-designate Mustafa al-Kadhimi. In a statement, the parliamentary office said Speaker Mohammad Al-Halbousi will hold the vote session. Last month, President Barham Saleh tasked Al-Kadhimi with forming a new government. The Speaker Al-Halbousi said the cabinet will consist of 12 ministers from the Muslim Shia sect, 6 from the Sunnis, and 3 from the Kurds. Iraq has been roiled by mass protests since October last year over poor living conditions and corruption. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened the Supreme Court not to interfere in his efforts to build a coalition government. Speaking to reporters in Jerusalem, Netanyahu said a decision against him may lead the country towards the 4th elections in over a year. Netanyahu made his comments shortly after the court heard a second day of arguments in a series of legal challenges to the coalition deal. Netanyahu and his former political rival Benny Gantz joined forces to form a unity government. The top court is looking into whether Netanyahu can form a new government amid criminal corruption charges, and whether his coalition deal with Gantz violated the law. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The Donetsk People's Republic says the OSCE's special monitoring mission to Ukraine is showing its complete incapacity in the Donbas conflict zone. Earlier, DPR said the Ukrainian armed forces wounded 4 civilians in the latest shelling on the village of Alexandrovka. State media cited DPR head Denis Pushilin as saying the lawlessness of the Ukrainian military units cannot last forever. He said the DPR will use every means as the security organization failed to establish safe conditions and ensure security for the people. Meanwhile, the DPR's foreign ministry also said OSCE officers refused to visit the shelling site and the wounded. It called on coordinators of the peace talks to undertake all measures outlined in the Minsk agreements to monitor the ceasefire details. In Libya, the UN-recognized government says it has conducted airstrikes on 7 oil tankers belonging to militias loyal to renegade General Khalifa Haftar. A military spokesman said the tankers were hit in an airstrike in the Al-Qariyat region, 400 kilometers south of the capital Tripoli. The tankers were en route to the strategic city of Tarhuna to reach Haftar's militia. Earlier, the government of National Accord conducted 3 airstrikes against Haftar forces at the Al-Watiya airbase near Tripoli. The GNA also gained an ally when a pro-Haftar commander, Ashraf al-Mayar, announced his loyalty to the Tripoli-based government. Berlin says the U.S. nuclear umbrella extending into Germany remains part of its adherence to NATO deterrence. Spokesman Stefan Schreiber said Berlin will continue to make appropriate contributions to the bloc. Schreiber said Berlin, like NATO, envisaged a world without nuclear weapons, but in the meantime adhered to NATO's nuclear deterrence concept, anchored in the Merkel coalition's 2018 agreement. His statement comes after the parliamentary leader of Germany's ruling Social Democratic Party called for the removal of U.S. nuclear weapons deployed in the country. Rolf Musendik said President Donald Trump's administration sees atomic weapons not as deterrents, but as weapons of aggression. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says the U.S.'s anti-human rights measures have hampered his country's fight against coronavirus. Virtually addressing the non-aligned movement meeting, Rouhani said U.S.'s illegal sanctions have prevented Iran from getting medical equipment. The president said the U.S. defunding of the World Health Organization is a strategic mistake which undermines the fight against COVID-19. Rouhani said the U.S. has repeatedly violated international laws and its actions threaten multilateralism. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankin has criticized the U.S. for blocking the International Monetary Fund's aid for Iran. He said the IMF must take a transparent and non-discriminatory approach in granting loans to needy and vulnerable countries amid the pandemic. The EU says world leaders have pledged over $8 billion to research, manufacture, and distribute a vaccine for COVID-19. Some 40 countries and donors took part in an online summit hosted by the European Union. However, the United States refused to contribute to the global effort. The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the money will help kickstart unprecedented global cooperation. She said it showed the true value of unity and humanity, but warned much more will be needed in the days ahead. In total, more than 30 countries, along with the UN, philanthropic bodies, and research institutes, made donations.
Today is a defining moment for the global community. At a time when we are sitting further apart than usual, the world has shown it is standing closer together than ever before. And in the space of just a few hours, we have collectively pledged 7.4 billion euros for vaccines, diagnostics, and treatments.
6 people have been killed after a plane crashed in Bardale town in Somalia's southern Bay region. State media said the African Express Airways plane was carrying aid supplies for use in the fight against coronavirus. Transport Minister Mohammed Salad said the cause of the crash is not clear. Salad said he has sent a unit to investigate and welcome international assistance. Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked armed group fighting the Somali government, has a presence in the area, but no group has yet claimed responsibility for the incident. The ongoing flooding in Kenya has claimed 164 lives. The government says heavy downpours during the rainy season have wreaked havoc all across the nation. Officials said flash floods, landslides, and sinkholes have left thousands displaced, livestock dead, and destroyed crops. They said this year's floods are the worst that Kenya has witnessed in years. Authorities have urged residents to move to higher ground and allow the construction of proposed dams and dikes as a long-term solution. In Venezuela, authorities have detained 2 U.S. citizens working with an American military veteran who claimed responsibility for a failed armed incursion into Caracas. In a televised address, President Nicolas Maduro said the plot was coordinated with Washington to enter Venezuela via the Caribbean coast and oust him. Maduro said authorities have arrested 13 terrorists allegedly involved in the incursion. He showed what he said are U.S. passports and other identification cards belonging to detained Aaron Berry and Luke Denman. Maduro said they both had been working with Jordan Godreau, an American military veteran who leads a Florida-based security company. Godreau, who identified himself as an organizer of the invasion, confirmed Berry and Denman were involved. Maduro said the Venezuelan authorities caught wind of the plot before its execution.
Mike Pompeo was betting on this attack and believed that this attack would end the revolution, end the Constitution, overthrow the government, and kill me. God save us and protect us.
Well, in the U.S., hundreds of giant hornets have turned up in Washington state near the Canadian border. State agricultural officials say the insect, dubbed as murder hornet, poses a threat to humans and the beekeeping industry. Washington State University's invasive species specialist, Todd Murray, says it is a shockingly large hornet, which is a significant health hazard. The hornet can sting multiple times through most beekeeper suits and deliver nearly 7 times the amount of venom as a honeybee. Scientists are not sure how the murder hornet made its way to Blaine, but they say it most likely came on a container ship docking at one of Washington's ports. Intentional transport of the killer bug into the United States violates federal law. The U.S. has announced it will borrow a record $3 trillion in the second quarter of 2020. The sum is over 5 times the previous quarterly record set at the height of the 2008 financial crisis. In a statement, the Treasury Department said the increase in privately held net marketable borrowing is due to the impact of COVID-19. The department said it expects the government to borrow another $677 billion in the third quarter. The U.S. government's total debt is now nearly $25 trillion, reaching over 100% of GDP. Washington has approved about $3 trillion in virus-related relief, estimated to be worth about 14% of the country's economy. New car sales in the UK have slumped by 97% in April from the same month last year due to the coronavirus lockdown. Figures from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders show only 4,321 cars were registered, the lowest monthly level since 1946. The closure of car dealerships as part of measures to try to combat the disease has hit consumer registrations. SMMT has downgraded full-year forecast to nearly 1.68 million sales. Chief Executive Mike Hawes said the market's worst performance in living memory is hardly surprising. Hawes said safely restarting this critical sector will be key to unlocking manufacturing and accelerating the UK's economic regeneration. European stock markets are trading higher as investors are counting on a revival in economic activity, with several countries lifting the COVID-19 lockdown. Banking stocks are witnessing a fresh rally, while energy stocks track a jump in oil prices. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading nearly 1.5% higher after the banking group BNP Paribas stocks surged nearly 6%. The shares of oil and gas company Total also jumped 7% after it posted first quarter net profit of nearly $2 billion, defying expectations. London's FTSE 100 has gained over 1% after oil giant BP stocks rose nearly 5%. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 1% higher as business bank Glencore shares jumped 10%. In Asia, Australia's ASX 200 led the gains, closing over 1.5% higher. Hong Kong's Hang Seng gained over 1% as well. Meanwhile, the international benchmark Brent crude price has gained over 6.5%. Demand is expected to rise following the easing of lockdown. Well, that's all from me for the moment. Don't go anywhere, though. I'll be back in just a half-hour time with the headlines. Stay with us.